episode number 55, How to Be Intentional in Your Marriage with Cody Chapman. Guys, if I know anything, it's that many marriages are struggling. This is a very unfortunate situation that the church is facing, especially since the husband and wife relationship is supposed to model the relationship between Christ and the church to the world. What's more is that marriages are the foundation of the family, and families are the basic building blocks of the church and society. So if marriages are in trouble, then the church is in trouble, and so is society at large. Now, oftentimes these struggles in marriages aren't due to a lack of desire on behalf of the husband or the wife or their commitment. It's lack of understanding as to what makes them work and how to improve them and move forward in the relationship. Now, if you're like me, we can read verses in the Bible that talk about the husband and wife relationship, but then when it comes down to the day-to-day interactions in unique circumstances and the nitty-gritty, we often don't know what to do to make things work. Well, Cody Chapman from On Purpose Marriage is with us today to talk about how to be intentional in your marriage and how to create a marriage that you love and others admire. Now, we get into some very specific actions that you can begin taking even today to be more intentional and purposeful in your marriage. He gives us specific questions to ask our wives to be better husbands and to be better leaders in our homes, and even gives us several ideas for how to keep date night as a priority and actually make it happen on a consistent basis. Fellas, I know this one is going to help you tremendously. Even if your marriage is doing well or you're not currently married, the things Cody shares today are going to help you in general with your relationships, and you can even apply some of the principles that he's talking about with developing better relationships with your children and being more intentional and purposeful with them. Make sure you get the show notes at dadhackers.us/055. What's up, Dad Hackers? My name is Patrick Antonucci, and I am the host and founder of this podcast and community of Dad Hackers. Dad Hackers is a community of Christian fathers who are devoted to encouraging, equipping, and enabling one another to become the men that God created and designed us to be, so that we can raise up the next generation of fully devoted followers of Christ and leave a legacy of multi-generational faithfulness. Now, on this show, we primarily interview Christian men to dive into their experiences and insights into what it means to be a Christian man, husband, father, and leader. We ask questions that dig deep into the thinking and rationale of these men so that we can all learn and grow into the men that God is calling us to be. I'm so thankful that you've joined us today. Make sure you subscribe to the show so that you never miss any of our episodes. Also, please make sure to leave an honest review in iTunes. Reviews boost the show's ratings, which means that more dads are going to come across our show and benefit from the content that we put out. I wanted to let you know that we also have a free private Facebook group just for Christian dads, so head on over to facebook.com/groups/dadhacker and apply to join by answering the 3 questions when prompted. So that's facebook.com/groups/dadhacker. Let's connect in there. All right, Cody, how you doing today, brother?
Hey, I'm good, man. How are you?
Fabulous, man. Thanks for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So if there's somebody out there that doesn't know who you are or what you're doing, can you give us just a little bit of context for who you are, where you're from, Christian husband, father, context, stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Great.
I'm a 33-year-old father, husband that lives in the great Pacific Northwest, the rainy state of Washington, which today it's sunny. So that is fantastic. My wife, Stephanie, and I have been married for 10 years. We have 5 kiddos, 4 of which we have the honor of living day to day with, and one of them who we will meet one day in heaven. We lost with a miscarriage, so that was never fun to go through.
No, it isn't.
Yeah. So we're living up here. I'm on staff at our local church here. So do that. That's kind of my full-time gig that I use to kind of buy groceries and put gas in the cars. And then yeah, we love, I just love hanging out with my family as much as I can. So whatever I can do to do more of that, we do a lot of that. Love camping, love being outdoors, love doing that kind of stuff. I'm also 6 weeks away from finishing Fire Academy, which will be really cool. So I can start walking into buildings that are on fire and maybe rescuing things. So that'd be
That's cool,
cool.
man.
Yeah. And then, yeah, so never a lack of doing things in our home or in my life. So
Yeah, never a dull moment, never a bored moment.
never,
Huh?
never any.
Yeah, yeah, man. Cool. So you and Stephanie have um, started a thing called On Purpose Marriage. Can you
Yeah.
tell us briefly what that is?
Yeah, for sure. So the inception of it, the way it all started, was actually, it was right after we had closed our first business. We used to be on staff at the church we're on staff at again, and we transitioned off staff to open a CrossFit gym. And we just felt like the Lord kind of pulling us in this direction. And we're like, hey, some people will walk into a gym before they ever walk into a church. So we want that gym to be our gym, and we'll show them the love of Jesus through lifting weights. So we did that. And after we transitioned, there was this weird transition time in our lives where we weren't as busy, but there was a lot of just like, okay, we're in a new job. We were so used to grinding for so long. And a weekly date night for my wife and I is like, that is what is normal for us.
Hmm.
And we've made that what is normal. And in this transition time, I had noticed we'd gone about 6 weeks without a date. I was getting in the shower one day and it hit me like, I haven't been on a date with my wife in 6 weeks. And I had the thought of, man, it's so easy to be a husband on accident. Like just to like, oh, like, whoops, I kind of like woke up and I'm a husband again today. And let's just
Yeah.
go through the day as, just kind of fumbling our way through it. And I had the thought of, I need to be a husband on purpose. Like everything I need to do as a husband needs to be very purposeful. And then literally because of my background with marketing and everything, I'm like, on purpose husband. I need to be an on purpose husband. It just kind of popped in my head. And I started writing myself daily challenges to do with my wife. And about 2 weeks in, some of my friends had seen my Instagram posts and different things. And they said, hey, I'm kind of in a similar place that you said you were in. Can I borrow these challenges that you're doing? And they were various, like writing love letters, sending text messages that were like kind of lovey-dovey. One of them is finding your first dance song that you had at your wedding and playing it on your iPhone and dancing with your wife out of nowhere. And they started doing this, and more of my friends started saying, I want the challenges. I want the challenges. So I said, hey, how about I do this? How about we take 15 of you guys and I'll write daily devotions for you as well, because they had also expressed they had trouble, being consistent in the word. So I said, hey, I'll write a daily devotion for you guys and give you these challenges, and it'll just be the 28-day marriage challenge. And so that's how it started originally. And then these guys' wives were messaging me on Facebook saying, what in the world are you doing with my husband? Like, I have never seen him this excited about our marriage, and I haven't had him pursue me like this in years. What are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. I just kind of tell them to do things and they do it, I guess. And so they wanted a wife version. And so my wife decided to write the wife version. So she went through and wrote a bunch of devotionals and challenges and all that. And then it became kind of a couple's, 28-day marriage challenge. And that is because on purpose marriage used to be on purpose husband. And then when we realized like, well, we could just reach more people and have a greater impact if we could talk to both husbands and wives.
Yeah.
That's when we transitioned it to on purpose marriage, and the rest has just been history.
That's pretty cool, man. Yeah. I think sometimes guys, they like want to step up and they want to move forward in their marriage, but they're just not sure what steps to take, where to go,
Yeah.
or maybe they're just not creative. Like I know that me coming up with my own stuff, it's difficult, but if I have a template to go by, if I have like an example to look at, I'm good to go. And then my creative juices start flowing. You know what I'm saying? But just coming up with it from scratch, that's a little difficult.
Well, yeah. And the big idea is complexity is the enemy of execution.
Yes.
So the more complex something is, the more likely somebody is either to A, not start, or two, not continue and follow through. And you
Yeah.
want to talk about something that is very ambiguous and ethereal. And there's like, how do I become a better husband? Like, there are very clear biblical calls to that, but
Right.
there's a lot of minutia and smaller things that the complexity of it just makes guys get paralyzed and they don't do anything. So having something like that, it just took the complexity out and said, read this, do this.
Yeah.
And end of story.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. There are those biblical passages about being a husband, being a father, being a man, but then, and like we can intellectually grasp the understanding of that, but then when it gets down to the nitty gritty of the day to day,
Yep.
in the context of your specific position in life, in your community, in your church, your family dynamic,
Yeah.
season of life you're in,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's like, well, what do I do like right now
Yeah.
in this particular context? But yes, I mean, that's pretty cool that you were able to help them out and do those things with them.
Yeah. We've heard a lot of good fruit from it, which, I mean, at the end of the day, that's just the Lord working through some of the words we can put on paper, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that it could be burned up and go away, but the Lord uses that and how he sees fit. So that's always really cool to watch.
That's cool, man. That's cool. So you talk about the weekly date night with your wife.
Yeah.
How has that been important for you guys? I mean, what level of importance does that have for you guys?
It's super important. I mean, we always look when my wife and I talk to couples about this, we're like, okay, so when you were dating your wife, you were deciding whether or not you wanted to spend the rest of your life with this person. How much time did you actually spend with them one-on-one? And it's okay. We went on multiple dates a week. We would talk, all this. And then all of a sudden you get married, and where does all that go? Like, just out the door. And so
especially when kids come along and things get a little slightly more complicated.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, since we have 4 kids, it's like, okay, we have to, the illustration of putting the big rocks in, right? Yeah, we got to, if you just fill it up with all the little things, you're never going to have room for what's important to you. And because of the pace of life that we live, and because of all the responsibility and all these things, the thing that could stop us dead in our tracks for being effective in anything we do is if our marriage starts to suffer. And so because we know if that has that kind of ramifications, we have to prioritize it. And getting away. And now when I say weekly date night, sometimes that looks like 4 hours and we got to dinner and all that. Like, that's great when that happens. But we've walked through seasons where we're broke. And we got barely any time. And a date is we're driving around the corner to Dairy Queen or McDonald's for 30 minutes, sitting in the car with an 89-cent cone. Like, hey, what's going on? What's coming up this week? How are you doing? We have questions that we call the big 2. How am I doing as your husband? What can I do better? And then just shutting up and listening. And then she asks the same questions back to me. And at the end of the day, if we grabbed a little ice cream cone and asked those 2 questions, like, successful date, like winner. And sometimes dates are all the kids magically are abed and in sleep by 8:00, and we get to sit there and have a conversation or, spend some time just devoted to each other. So it always looks different, but the prioritization of it is what is the big deal.
Yeah. And there's that on purpose piece. I see what you mean about the complexity too, because I think lots of times we think date night, we think we got to have that 4-hour dress up, go out to dinner, go out to a movie, come up with some kind of slick thing and a gift. And that's hard to do every single week. But yeah, I could drive down to Dairy Queen and get a cone, or we can be a little bit intentional and get the kids to bed on time and have an hour and go through the big 2 and watch a little Netflix and just snuggle up for a little bit. And
that's what we say. We say, define what dating means in this season of life. Like, when we owned our business and we literally were not making any money, we were living with my wife's parents and everything. Like, dates looked way different in that season than they do now. So we can't just have this, Landon and whatever her name is from Walk to Remember, right? Was it Rachel, or what was the character's name in Walk to Remember?
I don't
Landon
know.
and so
I don't know.
they ruined dates for all of us because he takes her on this extravagant date where he's like knocking off bucket list items and all of this. And I'm like, that is not reality, friends.
Right,
Like
right.
every date is not going to be fulfilling a fairy tale. Like sometimes it's sitting there, like, with a popsicle asking how your day was. But we have
Yeah.
to define those things because if they're not defined, they remain ambiguous. And then we don't know where to set our expectations. And if we don't have expectations, we can never win without expectations. So we just got to define what it means for us in our context.
Yeah. And I think communicated expectations are a big piece to that too, because lots of times we put expectations on our wives or they put them on us. We have no idea that they exist.
Yep.
And then we don't meet them
Yeah.
or they don't meet our undefined expectations or uncommunicated expectations, I
Yeah.
should say. And then
Yeah.
devil uses that to drive a wedge, man.
Yeah. We're like, your spouse is not a mind reader. Like you cannot expect them to meet expectations that you never communicated. Like
Right.
that is not how this whole thing works. There's a reason your job gives you a job description.
Right.
Like it's
And
to
there's a reason
clearly
you're frustrated if they don't.
exactly. Yeah. It's because they want to clearly communicate like these are our needs and our expectations. And then it gives us something to measure. But for some reason, when we go into marriage, like we just, oh yeah, like we shouldn't have to, you should know. No, actually that's not how it works. Like they shouldn't just know.
Right. Yeah. And the temptation is to begin thinking, if you really loved me, you would know. And
Mm-hmm.
then that really puts the pressure on because now you're questioning their love
Yeah.
for you or they're questioning your love for them and
Yeah. It's
doesn't
just,
end well.
yeah. Saying if you really love me, you would know. That's just a cop out excuse of saying what you're really saying when you say, if you really love me, you would know. What you're actually saying is I don't know how to clearly communicate to you the things that matter to me. So I'm just going to pass blame onto you instead because that's easier.
Ooh.
That's what that is. That's what it is.
Just
And
calling them like you see them, right?
just call it like I see it. And that's really hard to choke down because the problem is most people don't know how to communicate those things. Most of
Right.
us grew up in families where we saw our parents, not communicating well. And we never learned how to communicate in school. We learned how to regurgitate facts and take tests,
Mhm.
and maybe you went into college and learned some communication, but communication is this foundational interacting kind of a discourse that goes on between humans that we never actually learned how to do. We just took bits and pieces from our growing up and our going around. And so when it comes to marriage, we're almost starting with a limp. And that's one
Yeah.
of the reasons why we've made it one of our missions to help people communicate well, because everything else seems to go a whole lot better when you learn how to communicate.
Amen, brother. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that we kind of just naturally got onto this topic of communication because that's one of the big things that I really wanted to pick your brain on.
Yeah.
Um, and before we jump into that, you and I were talking about how before we got on the show how you guys are 10 years into your marriage, which is a great milestone, but it's relatively young
Yep.
in the season of marriage, and so I just gotta like put this pink elephant in the room question
Yeah.
out there
Yeah.
is why would people want to listen to you, Cody, and you and Stephanie to what you guys have to say as far as marriage is concerned when you're only 10 years in and we're looking at trying to make it to the 50-60 year mark in our
Yep.
marriages.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
We've been asked that question a lot by couples that have, been directed to us to come get counseling from. People that have interviewed us or whatever have asked us that as well. And the first thing I always say is like, if anyone asks us that question right off the bat, and I'm not saying you're asking the larger question that people could be thinking. What it instantly tells me is the person that's asking that question has a little bit of an unteachable spirit in their heart. And they want somebody that has all the credentials and all the papers to prove it and all these things. And it's like, okay, well, like if Jesus could use a donkey, like maybe we should just pay attention to any information that would want to come our way that could possibly help our lives, instead of just saying, where are your credentials, right?
mhm.
But deeper than that, what people don't really know is I've been like, and it's kind of weird, I've been a student of marriage since I was a little kid. growing up, my parents did not have a very good marriage. I mean, fights all the time, lots of dysfunction, all of that. And I can remember being very, very young, looking at that and almost studying it, saying, these are the things in this that I don't like. And these are the things that I'm like, I might take that onto my future marriage. And even my junior high pastor, when I was a kid, bringing up the idea of like, don't ever date a girl that you wouldn't marry. And so
Mm.
as I went through high school and graduating, I was constantly, whenever I'd look at relationships, how is this going to impact my marriage in the future? And then the other thing I did from a very young age is I put myself intentionally around people that had very good marriages so that I could learn and glean as much as I could. So sometimes we can see, people get on the news. It's like this child prodigy that, graduated with like a doctorate by the time they were 15. Nobody would look at them and say, well, why should I trust you? You're 15, right? But we sit back and we're actually in awe of like, wow, you've taken the time to become a master of whatever craft it is that you have now gotten so deep into that most people, even if they did study for 20, 30 years, they didn't even get to where you are. It's because they dedicated themselves to becoming a student of it. And so that's what I tell people is like, hey, I've just been a student at this much longer than the 10 years I've been married.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if anyone ever wants to question it, I'll just say, go look at my fruit. Like, because the Bible's very clear. Like, a tree is known by its fruit. And I know I have some friends that have been married 5 years, 6 years, 12 years, 15 years that are producing much better fruit than people that have been married 25, 30 years. So at the end of the day, I'm going to look at somebody's fruit before I look at the amount of years that they're celebrating for the anniversary, So I don't know, dig into my life, go for it. Like, it's an open book. Go look at my fruit. I don't care. Like, go for it. Go look.
Get some fruit inspectors out there, maybe.
Go for it. Yeah. Go for it. Ask my wife, sit my wife down and say, hey, let's air all Cody's dirty laundry. And how's he doing? Like, go for it. Ask her.
Yeah. Cool, man. I like your response to that question. That's a really, really well thought out question. I could tell you've been asked before.
You sure have.
Yeah, cool. So let's go back to this communication piece.
Yeah.
Now that we communicated about your credentials.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is an issue that comes up a lot in the Dad Hackers group and even in our mastermind is about this whole communication piece. And a lot of guys are really, really struggling with being able to communicate with their wives, or better yet, getting their wives to open up and communicate with them.
Yeah.
And so like, how can we set our marriages up for good communication?
Yeah. The first thing that we always encourage couples to do is to actually set a time aside for purposeful and intentional communication. Oftentimes we live in what we call the reactive or radioactive zone of communication, because we say there's three zones of communication. There's proactive, reactive, and radioactive. The proactive zone of communication is the zone where you are literally being proactive in your communication. You're communicating about things before they happen or before they become an issue. And then you have the reactive zone, where you are quite literally reacting to things that are happening. It's the, oh no, I forgot to pick Jimmy up at practice today. I forgot that I double booked myself. How are we going to do this? Then we get frustrated, and then we end up getting in these conversations with our spouse about, oh, you forget this, or you didn't tell me, or this or that. And then you very easily slide right into the radioactive zone, which we don't have to really explore what that means. I mean, but it's very clear that not any healthy communication is going to be happening at that point. So we say we want to get you into and help you remain in that proactive communication zone. And that's why we made our marriage communication journal. It's a weekly thing that you can sit down with your spouse. There's 10 questions that you ask them. And it starts with the big two that we mentioned earlier. And it's having a consistent place. So we always say consistency and content is what you need to start with communication. You need to have a consistent place that your spouse knows this is when and where I'm going to be able to either get questions answered, ask questions, or be heard about something. And then the content. What questions do I need to ask in order to dig deep and figure out how my spouse is doing, how I'm doing as a spouse, and what I can do to serve and lead them better. And that's the communication journal. It gives you the consistency. It's every week. And then we have 10 questions that you ask, and part of those rotate every week around, money, sex, community, church, spiritual, all those different things, how you can serve them, all that. So the basics is consistency, have a time you can do it every week, and the content, like what are the questions that you're asking that are covering your bases.
Cool. And I'd like to dig into those big two questions. Why is it so important for you as a husband to ask your wife, how am I doing as your husband? And then, the follow-up, how can I do better? But particularly that first one, why is that so important to ask on a regular basis?
To be honest, I think we can give ourselves more credit than we deserve at times. Like, hey, I worked 50 hours this week. Like, I mean, we got the bills paid. You're able to go buy that dress, or our kids are, this or that. And it's like, we can start to think that we're doing a really good job. And our wives could be sitting across the room feeling lonely, isolated, uncared for, not led. And we're over here thinking we're all that in a bag of Frito-Lays, and our wife's over here being like, man, I got a laundry list of stuff that if you started to do this would really help me. And so it gives us the chance to say, I might think I'm doing all right, but I'm going to ask my wife how she thinks I'm doing. And sitting back and listening to that, oftentimes that is a super scary question to ask.
Oh, yeah.
And very, very humbling. And if you're going to ask that question, like, be prepared to hear an honest answer, but also be prepared to take action on it. Like, don't ask the question if you're not willing to change anything. And when you hear the answers, don't make excuses. Like, right, rule number one of being a man, accept responsibility.
Yes.
And it goes right into being a husband. Like, if your wife feels like you're not filling her love tank as it will, or showing her appreciation, like, regardless of how you feel, that's how she feels. And that needs to be validated, and it needs to be taken action on. You need to accept responsibility for it and change. But at the end of the day, asking that question, it gives your wife the opportunity to air what is in her heart. And it's a massive reality check, and sometimes a smack in the face to you, because we were just kind of drifting and being like in la la land as husbands, and it gets us out of that.
Yeah, I asked a similar question of Jessica a couple months back, and she was honest with me, and I was working more in certain areas than I should have been, and some things were out of balance, and I did take action on it, and it's really helped. It was hard to hear, it was hard to swallow, and I tried to follow the rule of just listen, don't try to defend, don't try to justify, don't try to rationalize that, because you have your reasons in your mind of why you're doing what you're doing or not doing what you're doing, and I just took what she said to heart, and some other things were going on that were kind of signaling that I needed to clean up some things. And on the other side of it now, it's really, really been beneficial to me. I mean, I'm not 100% now, but I'm doing a lot better having asked that question and then course corrected based on her response to that question than I was, a couple months ago. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
it's awesome asking that.
And that's what it is. It's a course correction, right? And at first, when you ask that question, it might be a massive course correction. But when you get in the habit of asking it frequently, it becomes less and less of a course correction because you're asking it more frequently. It's like, it's how pilots have to adjust. When they make small adjustments along the way, they don't have to all of a sudden, crank the wheel over all the way and make this massive adjustment, because they've been making small ones along the way.
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm like, that's how I want to do it as a husband. Because, man, I don't want to get to the place where I have to do a 180. I'd rather make these little 1 degree shifts all the time. It makes life a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
And it's just less stress, man.
Yeah. Yeah, because whatever direction you're going in, you do begin to pick up momentum and pick up
Oh,
speed in that direction.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so if you're correcting that direction sooner rather than later, it's going to go a lot faster, a lot smoother, and you're going to be able to go a lot further in the correct direction. All right, guys, just wanted to give one quick announcement and then we'll be back to the show. I wanted to invite you to take a look at our Ironman Mastermind membership. Now, this is an opportunity for you to lock shields with a band of brothers in Christ. The guys in the group already have been giving me some amazing feedback, things like they find great encouragement as a husband and as a dad. That they find that this group of guys is dedicated to helping them become the man God has designed and created them to be. They feel like it's helping them thrive as men, and just lots of good feedback. So if you're looking for a place where you can share, be real and share your victories, share your struggles, you're looking for a place where other men will push you and cheer you on and help you grow as a dad, as a husband, as a business person, as just a man in Christ, then you might want to check out the Iron Men Mastermind from Dad Hackers. Now, this is different than your men's group at church. If you're involved in a men's group, we meet virtually, we meet online once a week for an hour, and we support one another, we encourage one another, we pray for one another. Whatever you're going through, the problems that you struggle, this group of guys is there for you. They'll provide wise counsel, they'll pray for you, they'll pray with you. And it's just an amazing time that we have. A lot of guys experience amazing growth, and a lot of the guys are experiencing major realizations about themselves and their lives and things that they want to step up in and are challenged to do so. So if you're interested in something like that, you can check out more information at dadhackers.us/Ironman. It's dadhackers.us/Ironman. All right, guys, back to our show. You
Yeah.
you brought up this idea of frequency. How often is there like a sweet spot for how often you ask it? Is it dependent on context or relationship? Is it?
Yeah.
I mean, what are your recommendations as far as that's concerned?
I do think it's all about context. I think everything with marriage really comes down to context. We can have there's big ideas and general practices and good frameworks for things, but everything is going to be applied in your context differently. So I think a great starting place, if you are not already doing this, would be asking your spouse once a week. Well, hey, Cody, when do I ask them that once a week? I don't know. Maybe your once a week communication time. Wink, wink. Right? Like it makes its way into that. I do think once a week. Now, I don't have to ask my wife this question every week anymore, because over the years we've gotten into such a rhythm with our communication in general, and just how we interact with each other. I don't have to ask this all the time. But for those men out there that are not in the rhythm of consistent, healthy communication, it's a great thing to do once a week. And then you'll start to notice, like, hey, I asked this question 3 weeks in a row, and on weeks, 2 and 3 of this 3-week chunk, my wife didn't really give me much feedback. And the feedback that she gave you by not giving you feedback is, bro, you're doing awesome. Like, way to go. High five. Way to be. And at that point, it's like, okay, maybe I'll ask this every other week, and then you can start to reduce the amount of time and frequency that you're asking it. But if you're not already there, like, ramp it up. Like, there's no, I would even say there's no problem with asking every day. Like, at the end of the day, hey babe, like, the morning and the evening time that I saw you, like, how was my attitude? How did I treat you? How did I speak with you? Did you feel loved? Did you feel cared for? Cool. Awesome. Tomorrow we're going to win again,
Yeah.
So I think context is huge.
Yeah. And I would venture to guess if you get the same response a couple of weeks in a row from asking that question, maybe that's an indication that you haven't quite yet made the course correction that you need to make. If she's
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would even ask the follow-up question, of, oh, okay, so you told me this, and this is the adjustment that I made, but you still feel like this. So can you help me? Like, can you help me love you in this way? Can you help me make this adjustment? Can you give me suggestions? And don't ask it like a jerk, like, well, I tried, so can you help me? Like, that's obviously you're just being a jerk at that point, right? But if you
Yeah.
ask with a loving, humble heart of, man, I actually gave it the best shot I did, and I still fell short, which kind of makes me feel terrible. But can you help me? Like, what would be the most meaningful to you? And then whatever she tells you, do that one thing or two things. Um, it, it is like, it is it's a chance to even dig deeper, if you do get the 2-3 weeks in a row of not meeting whatever it is that your wife would be talking about.
Yeah. That's a good point, man. So if I want to get started with this with my wife, do I just ask her the question first and, not even bring up her asking the question of me from my point of view? Or, I mean, how do you go about just initiating this?
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? What's your
Yep.
recommendation for that?
So when I look at scripture and I look at how the reason that we love the Father in general, right? We love because he first loved us, period. Right? While we were still enemies of God and in our sin, he came and died for us, right? At that moment, this was not a reciprocal relationship.
Right.
This was I am going to selflessly, sacrificially love you and do everything I can to love you before you ever have the chance to reciprocate. So for the husband that might be asking that question, I wouldn't even ask your wife. I wouldn't even ask your wife to ask those questions. Just you ask and then love her. And then you take the steps. You initiate. You just sacrificially love the way Jesus loves us. And you will watch her start to respond. Our wives are responders. For whether we like it or not, our wives are responders and they're reflectors of us. And oftentimes we can look at that and not be very happy with the reflection that we're getting. And that would be feedback for us that, hey, we're doing something that is not quite lining up here. But I would tell the husband, hey, you ask the question and then let her respond when she feels like it. But
Yeah.
you take the first step and don't expect anything in return, because the Lord didn't. Like, he said, I'm gonna put myself out here, and you may respond, you may not, but I'm gonna do this anyway. And I'm going to be the one to first love. So husbands, just be the one to first love. You can't go wrong that way.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah. Talking about expectations, like go into it expecting you're going to hear some things you may not want to hear, expecting you're going to have to make some course corrections,
Yeah.
but also not expecting anything in return or having any expectations put on her as a result of this conversation, because that's not what it's about. It's about getting feedback so that you can course correct and that you can become more of the man that she needs you to be.
Absolutely. And prefacing that conversation with, hey, babe, like, I feel like I've been blowing it and I've not been the kind of husband I need to be. So first of all, I need to repent and ask you for forgiveness for that. Will you forgive me? And two, I want to ask you these two questions so I can start to head in the right direction. And I'm not expecting anything of you, but I know I need to work on me. So here's these two questions. And when you enter repenting and it kind of putting your hand up in the air and say, I blew it. Mm-hmm. When you lead with that, that's really hard to be met with opposition. Like it just is.
Yeah.
When you throw yourself under the bus, it's hard for somebody to just try to beat you up even more.
Yeah, definitely. You talk about this concept or this idea of your wife being a responder and a reflector of you as a husband. I mean, you're supposed to be the head or the leader of the house, and we don't need to go, dig deep into all of what that means. But what are some warning signs maybe a husband might see that his wife is reflecting or responding in such a way that indicate that he needs to ask this question on a more regular basis? Does that make sense what I'm trying to question
Yeah,
I'm asking you.
totally. Yeah. Well, first of all, I think husbands need to be looking what you just said, that first and foremost, being intentional with actually looking and discerning what might be happening with your wife in her spirit and in her heart. That's the first step. And I think that's oftentimes the hardest step, is saying, I'm actually going to look with eyes to see what is not right here. Because it's easy to be, hey, I got to wake up and get to work, and I got to make this happen. We got to make boom, 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 boom. We got to go through our day. And when we go through our days like that, we are not looking for that in our
Mm-mm.
spouse. Not at all. So
No,
the
not at
first
all.
thing would be intentionally having the eyes to see it. And if you look and you're not discerning anything, but you know there's something wrong still, then ask the Lord, like, Lord, will you like unveil my eyes to see what's going on in my wife's heart and her spirit so that I can start to do something about it? Um, but then I would just start to look at the practical things, like what is her perceived stress level from you? Is she being short? Is she being withdrawn? The things that she used to enjoy and like doing, is she withdrawing from those things? How is she interacting with your children? Like, is she being short and snappy with the kids? Or is she, patient and grace filled? Right. I tend to look at the fruits of the spirit, and I'm like, okay, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. You just go down the list, and you just, okay, am I seeing those things, first of all, myself? But am I seeing those things in my spouse? If the answer is nah, kinda, like, that's the first place to start. Is how how are we exhibiting love? How peaceful is our home? How much joy? All those things. Those would be the first things I look for,
Mhm.
because those are indicators, right? That's the fruit, literally. Um, that is an indicator of a root issue, and you just got to trace the fruit back to the root, and you'll start to figure things out. But I would look at the fruits of the spirit first, and go from there.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, we're not looking as in a judgmental way on our wives to see what she necessarily needs to fix in her life, and then we're
100%.
going to come out with her with this laundry list of things. That's not at all what I'm talking about, and
Not
I
at
know
all.
that's not what you're saying.
Yeah.
I just don't want anybody misunderstanding our conversation, that this whole conversation is predicated around the idea that we're looking for feedback as to how we're doing as a husband. And if we're seeing these warning signs of
Yep.
high stress levels, shortness, difficulty, lots of frustration and anger, and just an overall sense of, you know, not peacefulness. I can't
Yeah.
think of the word. It's escaping
Yeah.
me now. It means not peacefulness,
Yeah.
turmoil. I don't know, whatever you will.
Anxious.
Yeah. Anxiety. Oh, depression.
Yeah.
Um, those are indicators that there may be some things that you need to do as a husband and initiate in
Yeah.
order to love your wife.
Absolutely. And the culture of your home, like, what kind of culture of your home are you setting? Like, every day when I walk in from work, like, my kids are always excited to see me, but the first person that I go to and give a kiss to and a hug to is my wife.
Hmm.
Not because I don't love my kids, but because I'm showing them, like, I love you guys, and I'm coming. Don't worry, Daddy's coming right to you. But I'm modeling for them even now, like, as a man and as a husband, like, this is the order this works in,
Right.
right? Like, this
Yeah.
is the order. I'm not going to flip this, and I'm not going to scar my kids by giving them, not giving them the hug 5 seconds after I walk in and going to their mom. I'm just showing them this needs to be right first, and then I can come to you because this is right. And if you're seeing things in your home that are not the way you want them to, you need to point the finger at yourself and say, okay, so what is it in me that is creating this culture or not creating the culture I want?
Yeah.
And fix that in you, and then watch that start to change in the atmosphere. I mean, it comes down to being a thermometer or a thermostat, right? I think men, we're supposed to be the thermostats of our home.
Right.
We need to set the temperature spiritually and everything. And occasionally we need to read the temperature, but we need to set it first and foremost.
Yeah. So as you've worked with couples and counseled with couples, I'm sure you've seen general patterns with some of them, and I'm thinking more in the context of, okay, there's a situation where there's some frustration, there's a lot of stress in the home, things aren't running smoothly, things aren't as peaceful as you hoped, and you're right in the middle, in the thick
Yeah.
of it with raising kids. You have 3, 4, 5 kids, whatever. Maybe you homeschool, maybe you don't, whatever it is. But I mean, like, where do you point guys to begin the process, to going through this whole process of kind of restoring their marriage, communicating with their wives, getting things on track, getting that feedback? Like, what are some first steps?
So honestly, it starts with the weekly communication. That is where you start. I would guess that every man that is in this kind of a context, and there's frustration and there's this and that, I can almost guarantee you they are not consistently and in a healthy way communicating with their spouse. It's just not happening. So that would be the first place I point them. Now, if there's some other things going on and you're a believer, seek pastoral help. Like, go get some help. But every single time in all the contexts that I've seen, there are unmet expectations that lead to the frustrations, all because communication is not happening. And I don't want to make it seem too elementary, and I don't want people to think that I'm insulting them by making it so simple. But sometimes I think we can try to overcomplicate things,
Right.
when it comes to marriage. And what we're doing when we overcomplicate it is we're then giving ourselves an excuse to not do anything about it because it's, quote, so hard. It goes back to the thing I said earlier about complexity is the enemy of execution. And if we know deep down in our hearts, the more difficult something is, we don't have to do it, or we're unlikely to do it, we'll make all of our marriage issues super complicated. And then we can just avoid them because I don't have enough time to fix it. But if we go back and just say, hey, we're going to have one time a week where we ask some basic questions, you would be amazed at what happens the weeks and months following that, and how a marriage can absolutely turn around just by spending that time. And we didn't have to go in and have some deep heart surgery, but just the consistency is what changed it, right? The Grand Canyon, or all these things that we can see that are changed. The landscape has changed because of slow erosion. That can happen in both positive and negative ways in a marriage.
Yeah.
We can develop a rift in our marriage over 10, 15 years because of this slow drip that just consistently erodes away, right? Because the enemy is a patient incrementalist, right? He is very slow and methodical, and he doesn't need to try to ruin your marriage in one day, although he often does that sometimes. But that one day is not what wrecked your marriage. It was the weeks and months and years leading up to that where your head and your spirit were not in the right place. But the inverse of that is true as well. We can create something beautiful by this very slow and consistent and repeated process that we do all the time, that creates something beautiful. So I don't want to oversimplify it, but sometimes we can try to make things more complex than it really is. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, just kind of like a little bit of a personal testimony. For a couple months now, my wife and I have been sitting down on Sunday, and we just plan out our week together. We plan out our menu, we plan out our grocery list, we coordinate calendars. And I'll tell you what, it's been very, very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And we've even developed a couple systems and routines with homeschooling and with the kids and getting duties and chores done and stuff. And it's really been helpful. We're not perfect, but just those little pieces of communication have really gone a long way. And it's not complicated. Like you said, we literally have a spiral bound notebook, and we just write Monday through Sunday on it. And we just, a couple lines each, and just go down the list.
Yep.
And it's been so very helpful.
So easy.
Yeah, definitely. So you talk about, with On Purpose Marriage, developing a marriage you love and others admire. can you explain what that means, like where that came from, and what you're communicating with that?
Yeah. So sadly, I think most people, most might be a bad word. I think there's a lot of people who live in a marriage they tolerate. Um, they they wouldn't look at their marriage and say, "Man, this is something I'm proud of, that gives life to me, that sparks joy in me." A lot of people are not in that place, and so our desire is to help people actually build and craft a marriage that they look at and be like, This is a blast." Like, my wife and I, like, whenever whenever we get a chance to hang out, like, we're having fun, we're having a blast. It's a blessing. There's joy there, and we can say, like, we have a marriage we actually love. Like, we've created something that is beautiful and we love it. And
Yeah.
we love that we get to do this. Um, and the other side of that is when you hear husbands say, like, "Oh, it's the old ball and chain," or this and that. You're like, like, really? Like, is this what, like, this thing that the Lord wanted for us? Is that what this has become to you? Like, this girl that you fell head over heels in love with, and your heart was pitter pattering originally to see her. Has it become so distant, that kind of love now? Like, no, let's get back there, because we could be
Yeah.
here. Um, so we want to help people create that kind of marriage. And we're very clear that we're not the ones creating that for you. We're your guides to help you create that. Like, you got to put the work in, friend. And we'll give you resources and be your cheerleaders and be your Yoda, if you will. Um, but, like, you got to put the work in to create this. And then the other part about that, others will admire. Like, I think the world, when I say the world, I mean people that do not follow Jesus, they should look at the marriages of people that follow Jesus and look at them and say, those people like hanging out with each other. And I don't see the husbands being jerked to the wives, and the wives like dissing the husbands, and their kids like love being around them. And all, like, the world should look at marriages that follow Jesus and say, like, I don't know what Kool-Aid they're drinking over there, but I need some of it, because that
Yeah.
looks like fun to me. And, like, if people could look at our marriage and say, it looks like they're having a whole lot of fun, like, that's a win, because that's what and yes, there's serious moments and there's ups and downs and all of that. But is the overall narrative of our marriage that we love it and it's a blessing to us? Or is the overall narrative like, yeah, like, it's all right, we're getting through, we're hanging in there. We want it to be a blessing and people have a blast doing it, because I I think that's what God wants it to be. Like, when we look at our relationship with him, he doesn't want it to be boring and dull and mundane. Like, that's not at all what he wants.
Yeah.
He wants us to enjoy him. Like in Proverbs, when it even says, like, my delight was with the sons of man, right? Like, he wants us to delight in him. And we need to be in the same kind of a place where our marriage is a delight to us.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's great, man. Yeah, I think that, marriages are obviously the foundation for families, and families is the foundational unit of society, but it's also the foundational unit of the church.
Absolutely.
And strong families produce strong societies. They produce um, strong churches, and that's all
Yeah.
predicated on a strong marriage. And you're exactly right about how a good, strong, healthy, fun marriage is going to be extremely attractive to the outside world. If we're no different
100%.
than what the world has to offer, I mean, why would anybody want to see what we have? Why would anybody care? It doesn't sound as good news if it's the same news that they've been hearing all along.
Absolutely. Yeah. People should look at it and be like, I want that. Whatever it is, I need to figure it out, because they got something going on that I don't.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned resources, and we've talked a little bit about your 28-day marriage challenge thingy. So explain to me a little bit about the resources that people can take advantage of. You've shared a lot of great information, and obviously you can't go through everything in a 45, 50-minute
Yeah.
interview. And so yeah, I mean, how can people get in contact with you or with what you're doing, and what resources you have?
Yeah. So first and foremost, the easiest way you can get a hold of us or, get in contact with us is following either On Purpose Marriage on Instagram, which is at On Purpose Marriage, or go over to the Facebook. You could also follow me on Instagram at Cody Chapman. We respond to all of our direct messages and strike up conversations with people all the time through those means. So feel free if you want to reach out and ask me questions. I'm totally available. But then the resources, the most popular resource we offer is kind of the bundle that we have, which is the digital versions, which means it's going to come to you in electronic form. And the reason that's the best is because it's cheaper. You don't have to spend as much money on it. So for $10, you can get both the husband and wife version of the 28-day marriage challenge, as well as the marriage communication journal, which is actually a 90-day journal. So we work through in 4-week chunks for 3 months. And we've had people get back to us and be like, hey, we were finishing up school and we were moving and transitioning jobs at the same time while having 3 kids. And this journal kept us sane and on the same page during all of this. And I heard that. I was like, oh, man, that's it right there. That's a win.
Yeah, that's impact.
That's so cool. So that, I mean, it's $10. It's the digital bundle. You can find it through either our Instagram or our, website or whatever. But that's going to be the best way to just say, hey, this $10 is a whole lot cheaper than thousands of dollars worth of counseling 10 years from now, or God forbid, divorce. It's a whole lot more affordable and fun.
Yeah.
That would be the thing. If there's anything, that people could pick up, that would definitely be it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cody, I'll definitely put all that in the show notes, and you guys can easily click on the links there and check out what you got. So one final question I like to ask as we wrap up here, and we haven't really talked a lot about family, in as far as being a dad or having children and those types of things, mostly just focused on marriage. But I always like to ask guys when I interview them, in your opinion, Cody, what makes a great dad?
That's talk about a loaded question.
Yeah, in 3 seconds or less. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Fruit, I think, will be the ultimate indicator of being a great dad. When I was a youth pastor, I always said, the greatest youth pastors won't ever know they are great youth pastors unless they're youth pastors 20 years down the road. And they have their students come back and say, hey, here's my life. And you played a part in it. In short, if I know I will have won as a dad when it's 20, 30 years down the road and my family loves hanging out with each other still. They're all following the Lord and they're all leading their family in that same direction. That's how I'll know I won, is to watch the fruit of not just my kids, but their kids' kids. And having those moments where it's like we're all together. We're like, yep, we won.
Yeah, man. That's awesome that you bring that up, because that's one of the big visions with Dad Hackers, and why you and I are interviewing is because we want to build strong marriages, but we want to have an eye toward a multi-generational legacy of faithfulness, not just getting our kids to become Christians, but setting up something that goes on perpetually, that generation after generation are going to be producing fully devoted followers of Christ until the day Christ returns.
Absolutely.
And that all of them would be saved and none would be lost.
Absolutely.
All right, Cody, man, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it. You shared a ton of valuable wisdom and insight and some things that guys can go turn around and implement 30 seconds after they turn off this episode. So I really appreciate it. And I love the practical advice, man. That means so much to me, because that's where I live. I live in the practical.
Absolutely, bro. It was a blast being on. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing, man. You take care.
You too.
Okay, gentlemen, there's our interview with Cody Chapman. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope our conversation was a blessing to you. Now, I want you to take a minute right now and commit to doing at least one thing you learned from Cody today to help your marriage or your relationships. Go to dadhackers.us/055 to get the show notes. And while you're there, you'll find links for how to connect with Cody and what he and Stephanie are doing with On Purpose Marriage, as well as opportunities to connect more with the Dad Hackers community. Remember, registration for the Ironman Mastermind is open for just a few more short days at the end of the month here. So make sure you check that out if it's something you've been thinking of doing. All right, fellas, until next time, remember Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another.